Welcome to the channel Test All Things, where our measuring rod is the inerrant, inspired, infallible Word of God, and we test all things against His holy Word. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about Job. I'm a student at SES, and this semester I'm taking a class on the Old Testament, and we had a class on Job. It's interesting because in the book of Job, it talks about what we call theodicy. And we want to, when we go to answer that, that's basically asking, how does God interact with man? And another point that it deals with is, why do bad things happen, that is, to good people? And so many of us ask that question. How do we practically apply that today? We often see these issues in our world today, and it's very, very sad that we do. We see that the bad things happen to very young children, bad things happen to very good families. This question that was raised so many thousands of years ago in the book of Job is still very relevant today. It was interesting that I happened to be on a bit of a break from school. I didn't have long between the time one class ended and another class started, just because of how the class schedule worked this time. So I was really wanting to veg out after I had gotten a very difficult paper done. And so I was just doing what I call chewing bubblegum, which for me means I was watching, binging on some TV. And I was watching Desperate Housewives. What a wonderful fine pick for Christians. But it does have some very good and interesting parts in it. And I was watching, it was actually, it was season 5, episode 22, just in case you want to go look it up. And this question actually comes up. Now, of course, in the book of Job, we have that this is about, why does God allow it? And in Desperate Housewives, they didn't address that part. But it was the same question. Why does evil happen? Now, in the book of Job, what we see is that 3 people came to comfort Job. And yet they really didn't provide comfort. At first, they're so shocked by everything that goes on. They sit with him for like a full week before they say anything. But when they start to speak, we actually don't see comfort. Instead, what we see is them being very uncomfortable. They are so uncomfortable with what has happened to Job that they need to try to explain it. And they can't just say, well, this has happened and you need to stay faithful. Instead, they start accusing him of some type of secret sin. And of course, God repays sin, and therefore you have some either known or unknown sin that you're not telling us about, and this is why you are suffering. So not much comfort there. They're not doing much of anything to comfort except trying to make themselves feel better. You see, if they can say that Job is suffering because he deserved it, then there's less likelihood that they're going to go through that. And that's what we see actually portrayed in this episode of Desperate Housewives, this season 5, episode 22. Gabby, who is a very affluent woman, has a couple little girls. And one of the girls, well, she's been raised to be a little spoiled, but she shows her spoiled self for sure. And Gabby's not comfortable with that. She does not like that. I think the little girl's name's Juanita, has gotten so spoiled. And she decides to take her to a soup-type kitchen to have the little girl serve. Of course, she's not going to serve herself. She just wants to have her little girl serve. In that, she runs into a woman that she knew that ran in the same high-end lifestyle that she had, and had been at clubs and been at all these things. And Gabby goes to give this poor, unfortunate woman money. And she's like, well, no, don't drink this away. And you can tell the person's hurt, but she still took the money. She needed the money. She was desperate and took the money. And later you see Gabby talking to Carlos, and she's doing the same thing these false comforters did. She says to Carlos, well, it must be that she had a drinking problem. Do you remember we were at this or that barbecue and she was drinking up a storm. And Carlos says, we were all drinking. I'm not advising that type of behavior. I'm just commenting on what was in this show. And he says, we were all drinking at that point. And so it's not that she must have drank it away. Well, maybe that's it. And so this frustrates Gabby that she hasn't hit on what the person's problem is, why this woman has gone from riches to rags. And so then she says, well, she loved her bingo. She must be gambling it away. And again, Carlos questions her and says, well, do you really see any sign of gambling? Playing bingo for a church fundraiser is not anything like having a gambling problem. And so again, we see Gabby's discomfort with what has happened to this woman. She wants to assure that she's not going to happen. It comes out that for Gabby, she used to live very poor, and she promised herself she was going to get out of it and do everything she can. And for her, she's so uncomfortable with the idea of this fall from grace that she can't handle it. Of course, God is not mentioned in here, but what it shows, and I don't know the exact years of that this was put out, but it's been in the last decade, the last decade or so, the last 10 to 12 years, that we're still grappling with the same thing that the Bible book of Job was grappling with. That sometimes unforeseen circumstances fall all of us, and we do have a major falling. Sometimes it is our own choices and our own bad choices. Sometimes it's our own sin. And sometimes these bad things happen to very good people. Well, then my other classes started, and I started watching a little bit of a different, I finished that series, and I started watching, of all things, The Waltons, and I have no idea what got me into that, but this episode was actually put out the year I was born, 1973, so it's season 1, episode 24. And just wrote those down in case anybody's interested in knowing them. And so season 1, episode 24 is called An Easter Story. And the Waltons, if you're not familiar with it, because it's a much older series, is a really good family. Now, it's interesting because the wife goes to church every week. The husband does not, but all the children go with her to church. And it's clear that the husband, John, does have faith. He just doesn't go to church with the rest of the family. He hadn't grown up, and he didn't, or he, as a, an older child, he hadn't gone, and he didn't want to go at this point. But the rest of the family is very committed to their faith, and Olivia, the mother, leads them all with this wisdom and love. Well, of all things, then she comes down with polio, because this is set back in the days of the Depression. And they have to grapple with this. Here is this God-fearing, God-loving woman who, by all accounts, has very little wrong in her life. No major area she's hiding or covering. And she gets struck with this horrible disease, polio. Again, the title is called An Easter Story. And here they're all waiting for spring. In general, it's the winter time. They're waiting for spring and feel like it will never come. And then she is struck with this, and they are all waited with bated breath to see how well she will recover. And for a time, it feels like it seems as if she's going to end up spending her life in a wheelchair, which is not overly practical when you have 7 children always, and especially at that point, they didn't have like motorized wheelchairs or anything. And so she's looking at having to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair, and it goes through her journey. And then her oldest son, and you might know the tagline from it, "Goodnight, John Boy." And so John Boy is the oldest son, and he is asking both the Reverend and his father this: why? Our mother is such a good mother. She's such a good person. Why did God allow her to deal with this? And unfortunately, the answer to that question is we don't always know. In the book of Job, we know that behind the scenes, God and Satan were having this interaction, and God allowed these things to happen for Job. And then if you know the book of Job, you know at the end he was blessed. He had lost his original 10 children. He had 10 more. And everything else he got back double. What's interesting is if we look at the fact that the children that he lost would not have been lost forever, but would still live. He was actually blessed with double the children, just not right here on earth. So he had 10 more children, and talks about how beautiful his daughters were, and that they were even given an inheritance with their brothers. So he's restored. In the series, not to spoil it for you, but it's been out a long time, so you can handle the spoiler. In the Waltons, we see the same thing, where Olivia is actually restored. She is, in the end, able to walk. And of course, it's right around on Easter when this happens, and she is able to walk again, and then she is fully recovered. But why was she allowed to go through this? We don't get a full answer. And Job does not get a full answer. What we see, though, is God telling Job, I am God and you are not. You're not going to know everything. Who said this is where the waters can come to? Who said this is when the moon is to come up? Were you there when these things were formed? Are the questions God asks Job. And Job has to admit, I'm not the creator. I am not God and you are. And that is such a big part of the message of Job. We are not going to know everything. We are not God, but he is God, and he's a good God, but we do go through hardship, and we don't know what that hardship means or why we are dealing with it. We do know, and very thankful as Christians. I'm also taking a New Testament class this semester, which it just works out. I have my OT class and my NT class. And in that New Testament class, of course, we see so much good news in the New Testament, where we are told that God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. And so we know that for the believer, even when we do go through hardship, it is worked good. May not even be at our lifetime here on earth, it may be in heaven, but we do know that is the end. But Job didn't even get that full of an answer. Sometimes we just have to know that we are not God, and that bad things are going to happen, and they are hard. And it doesn't mean that God's not there. It doesn't mean that God is not with us. But it does mean we have to go through, and we don't have all the answers. Anyway, these are just my musings about seeing all of this. Job was written so long ago. And then, of course, the Waltons was put out in 1973. And then here in the 2000s, Desperate Housewives comes out, and it's all searching for this answer. So you have this massive question that is asked almost by somebody somewhere on a daily basis. And we see it sorted out through all of our lifetime. And I just thought I would come and comment on that. Hope you find it interesting. Both of those shows happen to be available on Amazon Prime. That's just what I was watching through. So very interesting that we still ask the same questions this many thousands of years ago. So I hope this helps you take some of the things you see in the world today and test it against God's holy word, the Bible. And we will see you next time here on Test All Things. Thank you.